What's going on, everyone? Welcome back to another episode of the Muscle Memoirs Podcast. Today, we have a fascinating episode for you. It is my pleasure to introduce Professor Elliot Berry. Elliot, how are you doing today?
Fine, Mike, and it's a great honor and privilege to be on your memoirs.
Absolutely. Elliot, for our listeners who might not be familiar with you and your work, could you provide us with a little bit of background about yourself and your current research focus?
Sure. So I originally came from London. I live in Jerusalem, and I'm part of the Hebrew University. I was head of the Department of Nutrition and Human Metabolism, and then later the Department of Public Health. And although qualified as an internal physician, I wanted to go from the individual treatment on eating disorders to a more preventive approach in public health, because I can see that the problem is getting too much. It's too big for us.
Fantastic. And your background kind of alludes to what we're going to be talking about today, as well as some of the questions we've been asking on recent episodes of the podcast. And whenever I have a prolific nutrition researcher and practitioner on the show, I usually just throw a general question at them at the end of the episode asking, what are your general thoughts on how we attenuate these rising rates of obesity and cardiometabolic disease? But for this episode, our entire discussion is going to revolve around this concept. And the reason for that being is that you published a recent paper on the topic, and you basically outlined these 9 levels that we have to dive into. We have to put our best foot forward in each of these avenues if we're really serious about rectifying this global epidemic that is obesity. Now, usually when I throw this question at guests, they're going to respond one thing or another. It's ultimately a very perplexing question, and I'm just looking for their best idea on it. But for you, you published this paper and said, hey, here it is. This is the general outline. We need to tackle it from all of these different avenues. And for that reason, I'm very excited to dive into the weeds with you today and really hash out how we go about resolving this issue that the statistical models, based on what they're predicting, we are not getting any better. This isn't expected to improve in the next 10 years. It's only expected to get worse. So with that stage being presented for our talk today, for your paper, Obesity, whose responsibility is it? Introduce to the audience how this concept of responsibility has evolved over time. So, where did we generally place the responsibility of obesity in the past? And today, where are we kind of transitioning and placing our focus?
Well, that's it. To try and answer you, we'll have to be very correct and very, I would think, organized. And for that, I've used the sociotype model or ecological framework. This is something I developed together with help from Professor Sabine de Gies from the University of Basel and KU Leuven, and also my good friend in London, Professor Albert Singer. And basically, it's a framework for analyzing problems such as obesity and dealing with coping, which is really what everybody does every day. And it's at 3 levels. It's the level of context, and that is, in the case of obesity, the national context, the food system context, where the food policies of countries are involved, the education system, which is extremely important, and then the medical system, which dealing in once obesity, that's the whole thing. Is it a disease or is it a risk factor? Well, it's obviously a risk factor in the same as smoking and alcohol, but after a certain stage, it does become a disease. So the medical system has to be involved, but not only. So that's the level of concept. The second level of the sociotype is really interpersonal relations, things that you're not actually taught at school, but in our discussion of obesity, it involves public health, health literacy, the local authorities and municipalities, for instance, in producing safe environments, safe walking places at night for people, and also the society and the community. And here we have the social media, which has become more and more important in channeling people's ideas, in formulating people's ideas. And then the third level is the individual, or rather intrapersonal. And here, with regard to obesity, we have two levels. We really have the parents, because kids, childhood obesity, whose responsibility is it? I mean, up to the age of 5, 10, it must be the parents. And then your own responsibility. Do you have a responsibility to look after your health? And I would say unequivocally, yes, you must have a responsibility. Let me give you an example of it. First of all, it's a biblical injunction, but everybody doesn't need that. You really have to look after yourself if you want to live a healthy life. And then the more one becomes, and I'm talking about obesity, there is a disconnect between your biological age and your chronological age. What happens during aging is really a thing of wear and tear. Now, a person, I can't say an obese person, this is politically not correct. I say a person with obesity has got wear and tear on his joints because of the weight, the physical weight that he's carrying. He has wear and tear on his heart that has to serve his muscle. He has wear and tear on his pancreas to provide the insulin to deal with the food and the increased fat mass. And therefore, the more a person becomes obese, the larger the gap. So a person of, say, 45 with a BMI over 30, for me, is chronologically 55. And all that you can understand from that. And my job, or our job in public health, and by the way, the Lancet called obesity a catastrophic failure, and so it is up till now, to bring a person from his biological age because of the obesity back to his chronological age. So there are three levels. There's the context or societal level. There is the interpersonal relation, and that's the family, but also the authorities and the public health. And then the individual level, which is your parents and your own responsibility.
Fantastic overview there. And obviously, we're going to get into the further details of each of these sections. But I think for starters, I want to hone in on this concept of personal responsibility, because something that I've been observing within social media specifically is that we're transitioning away from this personal responsibility concept. There's this idea that, well, there's an increasing stigma associated with obesity, and for that reason, it's counterproductive to further enhance that by putting more responsibility on the individual. And as you provided there are numerous factors that we need to consider when it comes to someone's body weight in terms of the environment they live in, their socioeconomic status, the resources they have access to. And we absolutely want to consider all of these things. But at the end of the day, when we're looking at attenuating this crisis, to me, it would seem that we can't completely neglect this idea of personal responsibility. It has to be interwoven into the system that we're working with, because how can we improve things if we're not going to put any responsibility whatsoever on the individual? So for our listeners, provide us with this nuance here, the approach that we should be taking. How much should we be factoring in personal responsibility? Because there has been this surge with intuitive eating, health at every size, and these are phenomenal things, but they're ultimately context dependent. And it shouldn't be a one size fits all, in that,
Absolutely.
every single person should be made aware that their size is perfectly fine for health. Everyone is free to, do what they want with their body, in my mind. But they should also be aware that there are certain risks associated with that. So
Absolutely.
fill the listeners in here. Where
Well,
do we create this balance?
sure. Well, the first thing I want to say, and it's going to be with us throughout our conversation, Mike, is that you've got to keep a sense of humor. And we've got to realize that this is a major problem, and you've got to look at it sometimes from within and sometimes from without. So the first thing to say is that obesity or your body weight, like anything else in your body, is a product of your genetic input or your genes from your parents and the environment. Now, when you look at the graphs of obesity over the last 10, 20, 30 years, you see the line going always up. Now, genes don't change in that time. So it must be an environmental cause. And we call this the obesogenic toxic environment. And everybody, and let's say people have a spectrum of a genetic predisposition, which can be high and low, but it can't kick in until there is an environment. If there's no food, people will not be obese. And so you have to realize that. Now, the classic example of that is of the Pima Indians, which were investigated rather by Dr. Ravison in the 90s, and compared the Pima Indians who were living in their native environment in Mexico with the Pima Indians on reservations, say in Arizona, and there were about 3 to 4 BMI, and they've got the same genetic, obviously, balance. They were about 3 or 4 BMI points higher when they were on the reservations because they weren't in their traditional life. Another study is done by Claude Bouchard, brilliant takeaway on identical twins and the differences when you overfeed and underfeed them, and showing there is obviously a very marked genetic effect. But I would say obesity is inherited, but it's not inevitable. And therefore, you do have, if you want to look after your health, you've got to be able, you've got to, it's all about energy balance. It's the second law of thermodynamics: energy in, energy out. And and depending on the relative weights of those two, you either stay stable, gain weight, or lose weight. Now that is what you would say the biology. However, there is another factor that people do not talk about, and I consider critical. And that is the secret of Pharaoh's cows. Now, I don't know many of our listeners know about Pharaoh's cows. This is from the end of the book of Genesis. Pharaoh had a dream, and in this dream, thin cows ate 7 fat cows, and lo and behold, they didn't get fat. Now, isn't that amazing? Now, we all know that from looking at our friend. There are some people who could eat tons of food and stay very thin. And there are others that we know just look at the food and seem to get fat. Now, what is the secret behind? How do you explain that? Well, the answer is metabolic efficiency. Now, how can I explain that to you in terms of an analogy? And that's your car's petrol consumption. Now, there are cars that go at 20 miles per gallon. Here we would say kilometers per liter, but I think most of your listeners are from America. So some cars go at 20 miles per gallon, and they're very mechanically efficient, and they go a long way on a full tank. Others do, and if they're gas burners and things and 4x4s and all these terrible big cars that produce carbon dioxide emission, they got 4 miles per gallon. Now, they are always traveling on empty, whereas the most efficient are traveling on full. Now, what is our gas tank? Mike, what's our gas tank? Our gas tank is our fat. These are the only way we can store energy and store calories. So in order to be thin, let's put it this way, you require the opposite of your motor car. You want a car that is high mechanical efficiency and does a lot of miles per gallon. And you want a body of low metabolic efficiency, like Pharaoh's cows, where most of the energy that they derived was burnt out as heat. To make this a little bit biological, the equation is, or rather the pathway is, you eat food, it is turned into the body's energy currency, which is ATP, which is turned into work. Now, the efficiency of your body and our body is rather like the same as you riding a bicycle. It's about 25%. 50% of the energy that you eat is spent in heat going from food to ATP. Another 50% is lost going from ATP to work, right? But you can imagine that there is, like height, there is a Gaussian distribution. Some people are more efficient than others, and some people are less efficient. That is due to their genetics, or more importantly, how did they choose, or how did you choose your parents? And that is something you've got to live with, and that's your metabolic efficiency. Now, it's critical, but there's a big but here. It is tremendously difficult to measure. So you've just got to try it and see from your experiment with your eating habits.
And when it And when it comes to this
Sure.
idea of metabolic efficiency for the listeners here, this is kind of a general concept, but to me, it underlines that there's perhaps several factors that influence this, right? So, like you mentioned the Bouchard overfeeding studies, and it seems like a hypothesis or an explanation for why some people gained less weight than others,
Yes.
maybe due to subconscious increases in non-exercise activity
Yeah,
thermogenesis.
neat, yes,
Exactly. And then
absolutely.
we have all of this unique literature emerging on the gut microbiome, right? So depending on the unique gut
Yes,
microbiome, maybe we're
yeah,
extracting more calories for a certain
absolutely,
food with
yes.
specific individuals and
So
others, right?
so I want to make this a little bit more clear and give you some figures so to explain it. And this is an experiment done at the Rockefeller University by Rudy Leibel and my late mentor, Jules Hirsch. And in fact, I was one of the normal controls. So what they did was they asked this question: how many calories does a person need to maintain his weight? Okay. And they took about 26 people weighing 120 kilos. They put them into a metabolic regime, a metabolic ward, and they fed them formula so that their weight over a week did not change by more than plus or minus half a kilo, which is 1 pound. And they then giving them a treatment which I call the Churchill treatment, which is blood, sweat, and tears. They got them down to 100 kilos, okay, and then repeated on the same people, which is the great methodological advantage of this treatment, of this research. And that at 100 kilos, they said, how many calories per day do you need to maintain your weight at 100 kilos, which is they've lost 20 kilos or 44 pounds, which is no mean effort. And please, oh, that it would be that people could do this. I was one of the controls at about 70, 75 kilos, and then they asked me. So here are the figures. At 120 kilos, people required 1,400 calories per square meter of body per 24 hours to maintain a body weight. So I'm going to ask you, Mike, 50 kilos less at 70 kilos, how many calories does a person of 70 kilos need to maintain his body weight? And there are only three answers: more, less, or the same.
Less.
Well, you are absolutely wrong. The answer is the same. It was 1,350 calories per meter squared. Now, that's per meter squared. Obviously, in absolute terms, the obese people ate more because their body surface area was greater. But when you normalized it to meter squared, now here's the question. These people at 1,400 calories per meter squared per 24 hours at 120 kilos went down to 100. They're still 30 kilos above the controls. What was their caloric requirements to maintain body weight?
So if they
More,
were
less, or the same? You got three
less.
chances. Yes, now you got it right, Mike. You got it right, and that's absolutely correct. They only required 1,050. Now that is amazing. So what does it mean? That at 120 kilos, you needed 1,400 calories per meter squared. When you lose the weight, you only require 1,050. So what does it mean? What has the weight loss done to your metabolic efficiency?
It has I'm looking for the right word here. So so it increased metabolic efficiency. Yeah.
Absolutely. It increased it amazingly because remember at 70 kilos, you were 1350. So the fact that you lose weight makes you more efficient. And this is the body's metabolic adjustment. It's as though there's a disconnect between your head and your body. That your body is losing weight and your head said, you're starving me. And therefore I go into starvation mode. I become more efficient, and that's to do with the sympathetic nervous system amongst others. And you want to hold on to your energy, and therefore you require less to maintain weight. Now that's bad news. I give it to you as a posit that everybody can lose weight. Unfortunately, we've seen that in wars. We see this every day, unfortunately. We're seeing it during COVID when people don't have enough money to buy food. People will lose weight if they're on the poverty line, okay, the low social economic classes. But when people lose 20 kilos, 44 pounds, they say to themselves, gee, that's fabulous. I can let go now. I can get off my diet. And what happens? They don't realize that they're not the same person. Their metabolic set point in their brain is different. They start to eat more than the 1050 per meter squared, 24 hours. And what happens? They go up. They go. So the problem is losing weight has a metabolic and behavioral price. Of course, its health price is fantastic. I mean, you improve your insulin sensitivity, your blood pressure, and your blood lipids. But you are a different person metabolically, and one has to realize that. Now, that's bad news, and usually I try not to tell people this, but Mike, I'm using your forum to give them the straight truth. So it means that if you are serious about losing weight, you've got to continue changing your lifestyle drastically, or get used to a new, because you're a different person. You're born again. You're a born again person at a lower body weight. Now, what does this mean? Now, I don't know anybody who has, I call it, and I've written about it, called the reduced obese syndrome. That people who have lost a lot of weight, they feel cold. Sometimes they get constipated. It's as though their thyroid hormone, which is one of our things, is downregulated amongst other things. But these people, none of them succeed unless they do exercise. Or I don't like the word exercise. It means you've got to go to a gym, and I'm very much against gyms as a solution in public health. People can't afford to go to gyms, but I think that's okay. They have to do physical activity.
Hey guys, Mike here. If you're interested in learning more about how to maximize your health, body composition, and performance, head over to hammerawayfitness.com, where you can sign up for coaching or even just schedule an hour consult with me to get some of your training and nutrition questions answered. Also, if you enjoyed this episode as much as I did and would like to further support the growth of the Muscle Memoirs podcast, you can give a donation to the link in the show notes, leave us a review, and or share this episode with your friends, whether that be dropping the link in a group chat or putting a screenshot in your Instagram story. I truly appreciate it. Yeah, I think overall that's just tremendous insight into the complexity of obesity, the consequences of losing weight. I think people consider the process of weight loss to be a battle, not a war, right? It's a short-term thing. You lose the weight, you put up with the restriction, you'll get there, and then that's it. You can enjoy life again. And it's like you can enjoy life more than you did while you were restricting, but you're never going to be able to enjoy it to its fullest like you were before you lost any weight at all. And you highlighted a few fantastic points there, and something that's related to this as we're considering this in the context of personal responsibility. Something I want you to expand on is the fact that there is an element of choice in becoming obese to a degree. And when we're referring to an element of choice, we're not necessarily referring to the element of choice in that you get to pick your parents or your genetics. And we understand that that's a huge confounding factor, but there is an element to a degree. Could you expand upon that for the listeners?
Oh, that's a very hard one. I mean, everybody knows really And there's a lot of not misinformation, but nutritional recommendations change. It used to be saying that the fats were bad, and then the carbohydrates. People are very, very confused. And basically, you mentioned the microbiome. We are talking about tailored nutrition. Everybody should really fix their nutritional intake according to their own lifestyle and their body's biology. But the fact is, there has to be some form of self-regulation. You mustn't go overboard. Now, for instance, I don't believe you should diet 7 days a week. That's a no-no. You've got to take a day off, because everybody is human. You've got to have a day off. Now, let me just go into that in a little more detail to give you some facts. The recommended weight loss is 1 pound per week, okay? Now, I don't see so many patients now. I used to get them to weigh themselves on Mondays and Thursdays, taking a 6-day diet. And usually they go up on Monday and then go down on Thursday. But what does it mean to lose 1 pound? Now, in thermodynamic and energy terms, 1 pound is 3,500 calories. That's the caloric equivalent. So if I want to lose a pound, I need to be in negative energy balance of 3,500 calories a week, which is 500 calories a day. I think the mathematics is fairly simple. So how do you do that? So anybody can do this, and this is the self-regulation if they're particularly interested. They should do 250 calories worth of exercise and eat 250 calories less, so their net balance is minus 500. And then they say, wow, all that trouble just to lose 1 pound. I say, you've got to look at the long term. If you can do it for half a year, you've lost 26 pounds. Now that's no mean achievement. The idea is things have to be gradually. You have to fool your body, which is used to having certain amount of calories, to do less. It's rather like Campbell's soup. Campbell's soup had too much salt. And this is another thing we have to talk about the food industry and the terrible things about ultra-processed food and the terrible thing of sweet drinks. But we've got to bring them all in. Food industry is part of the problem, and it has to be made part of the solution. Full stop. Okay, so the Campbell's soup, gradually, they didn't change the salt content rapidly. They did it gradually to sort of get people used to it. You've got to get yourself used to a different lifestyle. I hate the word diet. I explained to you when we were talking 2 weeks ago. Diet is a 4-letter word, and I was brought up in England, as you can hear, and therefore we did not use 4-letter words, and you can think of other 4-letter words. So I prefer to call it lifestyle. Lifestyle is the name of the game. And that doesn't include just what you eat and how much you exercise. It includes meditation and your whole idea of relaxation as well, and looking after yourself. I'm not asking you, that's your response. Nobody else can do it for you. So you've got to have a little bit of personal responsibility. It's gone overboard, this political correctness. As I mentioned in the article, we've got the thing that the situation where patients with obesity come to their doctor and the doctor will not mention it. Why? Because some people take it as body shaming, which it isn't. It's just looking after their health. And the other is they're afraid to mention it because they get a negative feedback when they say in HMOs, how was this doctor treating you and everything? Oh no, he insulted me. He said that I have a weight problem. Well, he has to do that if he wants to prevent diabetes, cardiovascular disease, certain cancers, Alzheimer's disease. So he's got to do it. You want him not to do his duty because of this problem. We mustn't stigmatize people because of their body weight, but surely you must let them be aware that they are they're increasing their chronological, their age, as it were, their biological age, and they're getting out of hand.
For sure. And I think that's the line that we need to separate here, right? Because I don't know if you'll be familiar with this, but from what I've seen on social media, people want to like blurb out aspects of the word obesity. They don't want to use the word obesity anymore. And we need to draw this line and understand that this isn't a word that denotes anything about your moral standing as a person, that you're a bad person for being obese. It's just an objective measure based on certain criteria. And when we start to view it as something else, it results in people playing these mental gymnastics to try and put forth that there are no adverse health consequences of carrying an excessive amount of fat. And we just have decades of research saying the complete opposite. And it's coming to this point where we're just playing these games to try and escape this one thing and then make people feel better. And
Yes,
it's not logical. Like we need to take a step back from understanding this word of obesity as meaning something that it's definitely not. It has nothing to do with your character as a person, whether you're good or bad. It is simply
absolutely,
a measurement.
absolutely right. I mean, in the best scenario, it is playing games. In the worst scenario, it's being an ostrich, putting your head in the sand. It's very counterproductive because it is your health that is at stake. Now, it's very difficult. The same with smoking cessation. You can't say to somebody age 20 that in 20 years' time you get cancer of the lung. You're not going to. It doesn't. Hit them, it doesn't make an impression. Same with obesity. Down the line, they're going to die earlier. They're going to get diabetes and heart disease. We have to do it sensibly, but the social media has a big role to play in this, and it's very sad and disappointing and against all the public health things when people say, no, don't body shame me, I'm happy and I should be pleased with the way I am and I'm contented. But there's no moral dimension. You're quite right in saying that, Mike. It's just it's a health dimension. You'd think people would want to do good for their health. Now, I don't want to make everybody into obsessional dieters. I want to make people to feel comfortable with their body and they should be healthy and should be balanced. Now, here, I'll say that because it is so difficult to lose weight. Let's face it. Majority of people can't do it. So what do you do instead? Now, here's the work of Blair in Texas, wonderful exercise physiologist, who showed that all that you obtain metabolically by losing weight, you can achieve by being fit. And I have this slogan, fat and fit is better than lean and lazy. So if you can't lose weight and you want to be good, feel good, then exercise, then walk. Okay, I don't want to call exercise again. It means you've got to get into training. Everything. Just be active. Say to yourself, all elevators up to the 4th floor are broken. Did you know that, Mike? That all elevators up to the 4th floor are broken. Get yourself a dog. Go outside and eat. When you travel, and this is depending on where you're on the transport authority, because most people, unfortunately, use their cars. Get off a couple of stops before your destination and walk. Bring activity into your daily life. Don't send an email to somebody in the office 2 floors above. Go up and speak to him. And so it's a change your ideas about enjoying life and keeping a balance between eating and physical activity and mental relaxation and meditation. It can be a lot of fun. I mean, you'll discover yourself. You'll find it's not written in stone that you have to be the way you are for the rest of your life.
I love that because ultimately we're hashing out these details, right? We're providing context. We are by no means saying that healthier forms of obesity do not exist, right? We had Dr. Spencer Nardolsi on the podcast. We talked about
Yes,
differences uh,
adiponectin and levels and things like that.
in the
Yes, sure.
distribution of fat stores and how someone with an obese BMI can very well be significantly healthier than someone with a normal
Absolutely.
BMI.
The
But
fat and fit, yes.
yeah, but our point here is not that everyone needs to try to lose weight or that if you have an obese BMI that you're automatically unhealthy. Our point is here that generally speaking, there are risks associated with excess fat, and while everyone is free to do what they want, and you're not a bad person for having excess weight by any means. It's just that
Yeah.
we need to acknowledge that there are certain risks and we can't put our head in the sand and try to act like they don't exist because that's doing a disservice to the health of the general population.
Absolutely, absolutely right. And here, I think we have to talk a little bit about public health, Mike. And here is the way I think, after the age of 18, 20, after school, it's very difficult to change habits. It's very difficult to change habits at all, but it's even harder the later you go. And that's the importance of school education. And all schools should have education in lifestyle, in domestic science, in learning how to cook, how to make right food choices. That's easy to say, and we're talking about, I'm particularly interested in the Mediterranean diet, which has proven with the scientific evidence that it's good for obesity and diabetes and cancer and heart disease. But if you're living in a food desert in a city and you can't get fruits and vegetables, what can you do? It's very, very hard, terribly hard. And this is where public health and government and local authorities, government responsibilities to make sure that there is good, sustainable food for people to eat. And so that to help them, because it's very much with the ultra-processed food, it's an illusion of choice, really. It's all the same. It's very sad. And that, coupled with the fact that people they're not necessarily safe places for them to walk at night and things with lighting, really makes it a very, very hard battle. I must tell you something about sport, and you're the expert here. I'm very in favor of skipping. Skipping is a great sport to do in a closed spot. Boxers do it fantastically, forwards, backwards, cross it over. But that's a good thing. If you can't exercise, then try and do something like that if your knees can stand it. What do you think about skipping, Mike?
I love it. I mean, I'm all for anything that makes someone want to get up and be active. Speaking to my niche of the fitness industry, which is bodybuilding, related to the point you're making here is that
Yes.
some of us in this community have like this. We are not fond of Planet Fitness because their message is we don't want the bodybuilders, the meatheads in the gym. We're going to only use Smith machines and not have free barbells to use. And for that reason, some people dislike Planet Fitness. I'm all for it. Kick me out. If it gets other people in the general population to come to your gym and work out, then let's do it. You can discriminate against me if it makes the world a healthier place. But that's just a little side tangent, very specific.
No, that's good. That's absolutely good.
But I do like your segue there into these aspects of public health, and I want to unravel these levels that you outline in your article. So you touched on nutrition education there, and I think this is something that's very, very interesting because as most of the listeners will know, when I pose this question of how to attenuate the obesity epidemic to other professionals like yourself, a lot of people don't exactly think that education is the answer. And I'm not sure what my position is on this, but also when we look at how public health or just the healthcare field has evolved over time, registered dietitians have becoming a more predominant role. And I feel like education is becoming more widely available to the general public in terms of nutrition. I mean, we have access to more information than ever now because of social media, and perhaps you might touch
but it
on
has to be
that.
correct information.
Yeah, that might be making people more confused or actually doing a
Yes.
disservice to some people. But at the end of the day, I feel like most people know that they should be eating more fruits and vegetables. They simply don't. So what are your thoughts here on nutrition education?
Well, I think it's the most important. I
Okay.
recall there was a saying from the Jesuits, give me a child till he is 7 and he'll be mine till he goes to heaven. And I'm talking this about lifestyle. I think, the earlier the better from kindergarten onwards. The education system is terribly important. For instance, in countries like Norway or Japan, school lunches are also a time for teaching eating manners, sitting down, talking. Excuse me, could you pass the salt, or could I have the jug of water, and things like that. The social cultural act, and that's again in the Mediterranean diet. And that's why I am a little bit against fast food, because it totally eliminates the social aspects of eating, conviviality, we call it, which is so important to get social skills and conversations. But this has to be started in school. And well, where the lunches are provided, then you can sit down and the teachers act as not supervisors as much as influencers how to get proper eating manners, which is terribly important. So if I had to put my money on one thing out of these 9 levels, it would be the education of kids, because that's the next generation, and to get them to being aware of healthy lifestyles, of cooking, which we don't do, unfortunately. We don't have the time. But cooking is a very important thing, how to make a salad, how to make a fruit salad. And it should be going on throughout the school year. They learn about their bodies in biology, and it's terribly important. But it's not only that, because it has to be backed up, as you point out, by community education. I mean, some states in this have made laws that you can't have vending machines for soft drinks, for instance, near the school, and that's right. And school canteens have to be supervised so they perhaps can provide more healthier diets. The food industry should be given carrots and sticks. We should legislate that they shouldn't have junk food advertising to kids. That's clear to me, 100%. But we also should encourage them to provide more healthy ingredients in their food, less salt, less additives, less fats. They can do it because although they're not particularly interested in public health, they're interested in profit. And if we can give them, show them that we're doing front of package labeling here in Israel, which it should be done, there are traffic light systems, all sorts of things, to encourage them and to increase their sales by producing more healthy goods, so much the better. But it has to be, there has to be political will. And as, I mean, return for your investment. So governments realize that if they can help treat or lessen, combat, it is a fight, you said that, it is a fight against the obesity pandemic, then they will save money in hospitalizations afterwards. People getting knee replacements, hip replacements, treatments for diabetes, etc. I don't need to tell you, everybody understands that. So it has to be a national priority, because unfortunately, without political will, we're not going to get anywhere. So that's, and I hope the new government will take this on. Michelle Obama did it for kids, and we have to realize that it is a problem. There shouldn't be a stigma, but it's a health problem. We should do that. So at the national level, the food system, that has to think a little bit more of sustainability for your children and for your grandchildren. That's even harder to get on the political agenda, because politicians are interested in the here and now in their seats, not what happens 25 years ago. And well, I think if I can say, well, Woody Allen said, what have the future generations ever done for me, sort of thing. But you've got to get on, we've got to think about that with the marketing transparency and food labeling. The medical system, now here's an important part. When somebody comes with a weight problem to the doctor, he should be able to freely to discuss it with the person, the pros and cons, to see it in a non-threatening and a non-shaming way. As I said, we'll try with a little bit of sense of humor. What did it in Julius Caesar? Young Cassius has a lean and hungry look. I like him not. And compared to Falstaff, who was round and rather convivial and laughing. So, there's a balance there. And I get, if you can't get somebody to lose weight, you must get them to walk. And now on all your mobile phones, there's an app that says how many steps. I'm not going to say how many steps you should do. I'm against that, but I will tell you every step counts. Okay? And in this way, you can get people to gently change. So if you can't lose the weight, let's get yourself to be fit. And perhaps there's less antagonism to that approach and saying that you've got to lose weight. So there is a difference between losing weight metabolically, and that's very interesting. You only need to lose 5 or 10% of your weight to immediately improve your metabolic profile, your insulin, your blood sugar, your blood pressure. But that's not cosmetic for those, and I'm against the saying which is the right size for a person. That I'm not doing, but I want them to be healthy and to enjoy it while they do it, because as I explained to you, with the reduced obese syndrome and things like that, you've got to, it's a long-term It's a long-term project, a very long-term project. And now public health, we have to do things like encouraging breastfeeding, which is terribly important for future health. And I like using positive deviance. That's one of my, you look at countries which are the same as you, but are succeeding, and find out why they are succeeding. Or any community when they have problems, socioeconomic problems, exercise problems, some people are thinner than others. So find out what they're doing and see if you can do them. They're already socially valid. You've got the answer before your eyes. You just don't see it. Don't look what's done in other places all over the world, but what's going on in your community. And there will be some people who are less obese and some people are more obese. Find out what the less obese are doing and try and use their behaviors to change your own behavior. That can be done very locally. Community, there's cultural attitudes to food. Again, I want the civil society to be involved. Everybody's got to be a hand. No one is responsible, but everybody is, no one is to blame, rather. No one is to blame, but everybody's responsible. That's how I would put it. And let's get everybody working together and realizing that. And then, of course, the importance of parenting. Now, we talked about this, things that you're not taught at school. You're not taught about how to deal with relationships. You're not talk about financial matters, which are terrible. You're certainly not talk about parenting at school. And these things are critical. And for bringing up kids so that they eat, you don't always, when they cry, give them something into their mouth. You know, this is where the habits are. And this is the problem when we talked about genetics and environment. Look at this. You see, well, people with obesity have children with obesity. Now, is that genetic or environmental? It's very hard to distinguish, because the children with obesity are eating what their parents with obesity are eating. So that could be environmental, as well as inheriting, obviously, some genetic predispositions. They've got a double whammy there. But that's my key thing. Again, going back to children, that's where you've got to make the effort. And the biology, this is the individual, that's your lifestyle choices, your self-efficacy, managing stress, coping, going back to the sociotype model, which teaches you actually how you manage stress, which is what we want. And we don't talk about that too much in dealing with weight problems and energy metabolism. Obviously, if you're stressed out and you're nervously eating or whatever, but that's terribly important. Your personality, thanks to your parents and other things and your friends. But now we're learning in biology, there's epigenetics, how social influences and food influences can influence your biology. There's the metabolic efficiency, which I again emphasize, which is the key to understanding why certain people have a bigger tendency. If they're made more efficient, and that's during evolution, we were made to be efficient, metabolic efficient, we didn't know when the next meal was coming from. So it was good to be able to store food. And that kicks in when you lose weight, because the body doesn't know that you want to lose weight, or at least your hypothalamus doesn't. And it says, you're starving me. And so it goes into this energy conservation mode. And then there's brain reward neurocircuitry. There's lots going on there, which we really can't deal with it. But you want to make it simple. So what would be the messages to give to all the readers of Muscle Memoirs and all the listeners to Muscle Memoirs? I think first we've got to realize there is a problem. There is personal choice in this. You should take it seriously, but not too seriously. And when push comes to shove, the best you can do is to be active, I think.
Elliot, so many fantastic points there. I want to hone in on a couple of them that I think are especially intriguing, actionable steps that we can take if we can get everyone on the same page, especially the food industry, right? So yes. you mentioned that where you're at right now, there's this utilization of this the stoplight system, right? In terms of food. So we have green, yellow, red. And this is something that fascinates me because I think in theory it makes sense. Like it's an easy, simple heuristic that regardless of your educational background, you can see and think to yourself, okay, I should eat more of this food and probably less of
More
that
of the
food.
green than the red, yes.
Right. Which is
Providing the price is okay, because that's another determinant, and then we can encourage people to do maybe price controls on basics. Yes, sure, but that's again at a national but it is important, the food labeling front of package.
I think it's wonderful, but I also think that there would be many opponents to this idea depending on where you're at in the world. And related to our conversation, I think a lot of people would see this idea and say that we should not implement this on a widespread basis because it can facilitate or increase the probability of someone developing disordered eating by denoting that some foods are good or bad. So I want to get your thoughts on what's going on there and whether you think that this is a logical concern, something that could potentially outweigh the benefits.
No, I don't think it does away the benefits, but the front of package labeling has to be coordinated with nutritional education at the community and the public level, I mean, there are various things. The Americans use the plate. I prefer the pyramid. But whatever you use, so you educate the people of the right balance, the fuel mix that you have, more fruits and vegetables and whole grains, and then pulses and things, and then going up. And at the top of the pyramid, but you have everything, it will be your sweets and chocolates, but you could have them. I don't believe anything. Sometimes I get into arguments with dietitians. They're very good friends and they're doing the work. But I used to say nothing is forbidden. I don't forbid any food. It's just in moderation. My late father used to say, my late father, Dr. David Berry, used to say everything in moderation, including moderation. I mean, we're talking about lifetime events. So you can have nothing wrong with having a bit of chocolate, but not too many chocolates. There's nothing having and take a bit of chocolate and putting a cube in your mouth and seeing how long you can suck it before it goes down instead of gobbling it down. There's lots to be done about eating habits and how you can regulate and enjoy things without saying that things are forbidden. It's just a question of amounts, but people don't necessarily agree with me there. But I don't think it's wrong. I think it's wrong to forbid people, but you've got to help encourage correct meal choices, and that's very difficult. Go back to what you said at the very beginning. We are talking about a problem of mainly of the low socioeconomic status. The rich people say you can never be too rich or too thin. Okay, forget that. I'm just saying about the people who really can't, who are in these food deserts, who have problems, and how are we going to get to them? They can't go to the gyms, Mike. They can't do that. They've got to have proper role models, and that's a tremendous problem. I don't really know how to do that in schools. But if you're going to tackle and combat the obesity pandemic, you've got to realize where the problem is. And find suitable ways. We've done food stamps and things like that. And now, because of COVID, it's just the opposite. People haven't got enough to eat, and there's food insecurity. That's a terrible problem, and we're trying to find how to deal with that. And the ramifications of the corona and the COVID will be many, many years ahead. And so we've got to try and plan for that and try and help people. I don't want to be paternalistic and say, I'll give you a food stamp. You can't obviously. That we wouldn't particularly want them to buy alcohol and cigarettes with the food, but certainly within that, they've got to make their choices and feel, this is the other thing when you're giving food, that people should feel dignified and they shouldn't feel stigmatized for accepting food aid, and that's terribly different, to give them the right feelings of honor and dignity. And I don't have all the answers, but at least I can put them on the table that people should be working on these problems, and with the food banks and everything else like that. So I'm not so optimistic of the immediate future because of COVID.
Yeah, I think that was really well said, and I appreciate your take on the topic. Related to this, when I look at all of the potential avenues that we can utilize, and whether some might be more important than others, but as we've outlined, we really need to tackle this from all aspects if we're really interested in succeeding. But to me, it seems like these potential syntaxes of sorts for specific foods might be the the solution that has the most potential. So making certain foods cost more could really decrease consumption. And I whenever I think about this in the context of where I am in America, these things are always troublesome because it seems like no matter which policy you're proposing or this and that, it becomes more of a political statement than anything else, right? In terms of public health. So we have like soda taxes in Philadelphia, but what are your thoughts here in terms of the application of this? Do you think that this is something that could we could
Ooh.
get on board with widespread? Would it be effective? Is America the only country where we're really concerned whether this would be successful or not?
Well, there's a couple of things here. In principle, I'm against syntaxes. I prefer carrots to sticks. But if the syntaxes we use to go back to make public playgrounds, to reduce the prices of good food or more healthy food, then that might be the way to do it. The question is what you do with the syntax, and usually doesn't get back to the people who are paying it, or rather who should be. Hold on, I'm just going to put my battery on. What can we say about that? The syntax is okay. There's hotels I think in Germany, which you have to pay your room rate by your weight or something like that. And it might be that on airlines that whether the price of the ticket, I don't know if that's a good thing or a bad thing. But in general, if the syntaxes come, and there's certain things I think that people now agree that ultra processed food is bad, it's not good, and all these sweet drinks. So if they maybe had a tax like they do on cigarettes, but the taxes go back to the people who need it in the community, okay, either to subsidize foods or playgrounds or safe walkways or lighting, then that might be a way of doing. But it has to be part of a comprehensive policy, and the public need to be aware of it. The public are totally confused, certainly, by nutritional recommendations. And so we have a big job on using the media, role models, actors, actresses, soccer stars, baseball stars to come out and to encourage them to help in changing the views about food and lifestyle, rather, the balance between intake and outtake in the population, especially the young. As again, I emphasize, you've got to tackle the young people.
Yeah, and as you alluded to earlier, at the very least, if we're not going to change what's going on in the food industry by increasing the cost of these ultra processed foods, at the very least, we should definitely be limiting or removing the advertising of these foods to
Yes.
children.
Yes, absolutely. No junk food advertising to kids. Absolutely, in the time, up till 9 o'clock or whatever, if at all. It's amazing how many of the advertising spots are for foods, and the way they show them, it really hasn't moved with the times to make them more healthy. It's sad altogether. There's a lack of awareness, so that's where it has to be done on the context or the national scale. With the food system, the education system, the medical system, have got to be pulling together. So we need to bring it all together. We need to bring all these threads together. And again, that depends on political will and a few crazy people. You've got to be crazy about it. Might you be a good what do you call it, influencer? I don't know. You've got to move out now and start getting people to follow you and to change and to be more healthy. And it's fun. Let's not. Let's say it can be fun, and you've got to be doing it. And it's nothing about body shaming, and it's not about, but people have got to be aware, and we've got to make them more healthy. That's our responsibility for the future generations.
Absolutely. And that's ultimately what we're trying to do with this podcast, right? We're trying to
Yes,
spread the good word, provide
yes.
context, provide education to help make this world a healthier place and just a better place to be in for everyone. Elliot, we covered a myriad of wonderful points about this very perplexing topic. So
Terrible problem. Yes, as my mentor used to say, a terrible problem.
let's wrap this up for the listeners.
Yes.
At least summarize our main points here, or the things that we should really be reflecting on after listening to this discussion.
Okay. So what I would say is when we started with saying that everybody's a product of their genes and the environment. Some people have more obesity type genes and some people have less. When it comes to analyzing what this actually does, it depends on your metabolic efficiency. The people who are more efficient will have a tendency to gain weight. The people who are less efficient on the same sort of nutritional input won't gain weight. A key aspect of this, although if you can't lose the weight, is physical activity. Fat and fit is better or as good as being lean and lazy. And the next point is, but to tackle this on a national scale, the emphasis has to be on education in the schools, definitely forever. The social media has a very important place in this to influence in a positive way, get away from fat shaming, get away from saying that it's okay. People have to realize there is certainly for childhood obesity, there is parental obesity, rather parental responsibility to help children. And there is, when push comes to shove, you've got to look after your own health because nobody else will do it for you, and you've got to do this in a understanding way, and again with a sense of somewhere, as I say, a sense of humor. And we use the sociotype framework of the context, interpersonal relationships, terribly important, and intrapersonal, how you deal with yourself and how you think about yourself, your own philosophy of life. And this changes with your life trajectory, and it will change, but you've got to be aware of it and to go with the flow, as it were. And I think what you're doing, Mike, is tremendously important, is to give a rational and balanced view to people of what the problem is and if we can help. If you could publish my email address, I'd be very pleased to answer any of the listeners' questions or viewers' questions of what's going on.
Absolutely. All your articles, which we referenced today, will be in the show notes. I can include your email as well. But for the listeners who want to learn more about you, go and support you, is there anywhere else we can point them towards? Are you on social media, Elliot?
No, I am not. I was afraid you would ask that question. I am not. I'm one of the next generation. I have enough trouble dealing with my emails and other work. I really don't do social media. I'm sure it's a great loss, but I'll let my children and other people do it. And it's just one of those things I have to admit.
I completely understand. You're not the first professional we've had on who wasn't really active on social media. So I will link your email instead, and that will be a resource for the listeners who are interested in learning more about some of the details we dived into today. But that takes care of it for this episode of the Muscle Memoirs podcast. Elliot, it's been a pleasure. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you. Thank you, Mike. You've been a splendid interviewer, and I wish you the best of luck with all the good work that you're doing.